Are we going to wake up tomorrow and find out that we're considered too black to be free? If you're black in Texas, you need to get out of here, or we're going to sell you into slavery. No free person of African descent, either in whole or in part, shall be permitted to reside permanently. This is absolutely wild. Hi, I'm Danielle Romero. Thank you so much for being with me here on my channel, where we've been talking about American identity and hidden history and all of that. Today we're going to talk about some Texas, Louisiana history. And we're going to talk about something called the Ashworth Act. There's actually a few other of these that I want to cover, but today we're just talking about the Ashworth Act. And the Ashworth Act was the law that saved free blacks from slavery in Texas. And I'm using the word black because that is actually the wording of the act. And we're going to kind of pull that apart and see what does that mean. The Ashworths were one of the original Redbone families. Actually, the history seems to point to them being Melungeon and coming over from the Carolinas all the way over to Texas and Louisiana and becoming Redbone there. But before I tell you about this shocking law, when being black could cost you your freedom, I want to tell you a story of a man who was finding himself in the thick of it, and his name was Joseph Tate. In the early 1830s, Joseph Tate was a free black man in Jasper County, Texas. Now, under the Mexican government, because remember, Texas was not always Texas, it was not always a part of the United States, and under the Mexican government, he enjoyed the full rights of citizenship there. This was a liberty that was both a promise and a reality. That is to say, he was able to be free now and forever. And encouraged by the Mexican government policies, Tate had immigrated to Texas, lured by the prospects of liberty and land. Now, Tate's residency permit was granted, and his December 1839 application to obtain land in the neighboring Jefferson County, though, was denied, quote, in consequence of his ebony coloring. So now a heated debate had broken out in Congress that same December over the continued residence of what they were calling free blacks. So legislators were arguing that the presence of free blacks living as responsible, hardworking residents undermined the belief that they were inferior. And this called into question the legitimacy of slavery. Let me rephrase this for you. At the time, there was a availability for people of color, people who are considered black or colored or whatever, to come to Texas and be free. And we're talking 1839. Now, if you need to be brushed up a little bit on your American history, this is almost 3 decades before the Emancipation Proclamation, the Civil War. Um, so right now we're talking people are enslaved. People of color are enslaved in tons of places around the country. But in Texas, you could go and you could work hard. But some people were upset about this because they said, if we let these men and women come and work and have land, how can they be free here and be hardworking residents here, but they're enslaved over here? So in February of 1840, Congress instituted, quote, an act concerning free persons of color. That's what the act was called. And it ordered all free blacks to leave the Republic of Texas within 2 years unless they had exemption from Congress. Those who weren't granted exemption, okay, and didn't leave could be sold into slavery. I'm gonna let this sink in for a second because this I had to read a couple times. I was not believing that this was the history that I was reading. I just honestly, I didn't believe it. And I want to just pause again to say that if you're like me, I had a lot of family that was moving in between Louisiana and Texas, Mexico at this time, kind of moving around the South. Some family members were actually still enslaved at this point in Louisiana. And then I had family over in Texas. And when I am doing research, I think sometimes we get real dry with it. And we've got these documents and these census records. But it helps so much to put your family in context. Like, where were they living? What was it like where they were living? Well, if your family was in Texas, now you know. So the act outlawed the immigration of free blacks into the Republic too. So they said, like, we're stopping them from coming in. And if you stay, you can get sold into slavery. So you got to skedaddle. So the public outcry in response to this act subsequently prompted something called, quote, an act for the relief of certain free persons of color. So like we're kind of going back and forth here. This was also known as the Ashworth Act, for the people named in the petition. So now I want to talk about another man who was a contemporary of this time, and his name was Samuel McCulloch Jr. And he was born in South Carolina in 1810, and his journey took him from Alabama to Texas with his father, Samuel Sr., in May of 1835. This was a huge change for Samuel and his sisters. They entered a world where being free blacks had a unique set of challenges. And remember, at this time in other places, in the South and in the North, uh, you could be enslaved. So in Texas, this was the place that promised new beginnings. So Samuel Jr.'s life quickly became intertwined, though, with the state's tumultuous history. So within months of his arrival, he joined a volunteer company that led him to the front lines of the Texas Revolution. He moves there, he joins, um, and just 4 days before his 25th birthday, he was part of the daring attack on Mexican army garrison at Goliad. And Goliad is actually a mission. I can't remember the other name, but I had family that actually went through there as indigenous people, that went through and the baptism and all of that. And here, Samuel Jr. made an indelible mark on history. As an eyewitness account said, he was the first soldier to enter the fort. So this is a brave man. And tragically, though, during this assault, he was severely wounded in the right shoulder by a musket ball, and this was an injury that would affect him for the rest of his life. Now, despite his bravery, Samuel Jr.'s return to civilian life in the newly independent Texas, because remember, Texas was fighting to be its own thing and get away from the Mexican government. Well, his freedom was marred by these legal and social challenges that have come up. So the Republic of Texas, under its 1836 Constitution, placed restrictions on the rights of free blacks like Samuel Jr. It declared, quote, that no free person of African descent, so of African descent, so, I count, my family counts, either in whole or in part, shall be permitted to reside permanently in the Republic without the consent of Congress. Let me read that to you again. No free person of African descent, either in whole or in part, shall be permitted to reside permanently in the Republic without the consent of Congress. So this law put Samuel Jr., who had fought for the Republic's freedom, in a position now where he had to petition Congress to remain a citizen and remain in the land that he helped to liberate. So his 1837 petition stated that he was, quote, deprived of the privileges of citizenship by reason of an unfortunate admixture of African blood. Now, despite these obstacles, Samuel Jr. persevered. He was eventually granted residency. Um, and I want to jump now down to the Ashworth Act, because that is the pushback. That was the pushback. But I want to tell you a little bit about the Ashworths themselves before I tell you about their petition. So, tracing their roots, the Ashworths may have been descendants of the Portuguese immigrants. People say they have North African genealogy. And so they had a journey from South Carolina through Louisiana, ended in Beaumont, Texas in the early 1830s. And you can see there's a lot of movement in the 1830s. I think sometimes we think people are super static, but we've got people moving all around. I think that is in part why Melungeon, Creole, and Redbone families have so much overlap. So, before 1836, the Ashworth family possibly enjoyed a higher social status more akin to white people and Anglo settlers in Texas. Remember, they were allowed to be free there. They were actually a pretty prosperous family, and they were pretty well to do. And post 1836, though, the Texas ordinance, what we talked about, barred future Black and free people of color's immigration, and it stripped the rights of those who were already in Texas. Ashworths had a petition that was backed by 47 citizens in the first round and 72 in the second, which just highlighted how respectable they were seen in their community, their contributions to the Texas Revolution, much like Samuel Jr.'s. And these petitions, alongside others, including for a man named Elisha Thomas and William Goins, played a pivotal role in what happened next. So the committee recognized the Ashworth family's contributions and their good standing, and it recommended an exception for them And this started to set the legislative wheels in motion. So let's talk about the actual Ashworth Act getting passed. So the bill passed the Senate, the Texas Senate, on November 23rd, 1840, and became law in a few weeks. And it was known as the Ashworth Act. And this act not only exempted the Ashworth family, but it extended protection to all free people of color who were present in Texas before the Declaration of Independence. This had a profound impact on these families. It was a significant milestone in the fight against racial injustice in the Republic of Texas. And think about how early on this was. What's fascinating to me is to think that we have yet to even hit the point of the Civil War, right? I mean, that's decades away still at this point, but you could see that the wheels are already kind of in motion here for change. The Ashworth Act's significance, we have to understand the backdrop for it. But there were more acts. There was also the Doyle Act and the Goins Act, and you may recognize these as Redbone family names that we talked about in the uh, previous video. And I just love seeing these families kind of band together, get the community to come around them and support them, and change history. I think that it is important when we're looking into our family history. I think for a lot of us who have family history here in America, and maybe even more particularly in the South, in Louisiana and Texas, in these areas where there was a lot of change and a lot of changing of hands of who is in power, that sometimes truthfully our family may not know their family story. They really may not know it, and part of the reason they wouldn't know it is because you are almost always living under this shadow that, yes, we're safe today, but what about tomorrow? Are we going to wake up tomorrow and find out that we're considered too black to be free? I mean, I feel like this is a maybe it's just me. I mean, I love history. I love American history. I have never heard of the Ashworth Act and what preceded it. I mean, it blows my mind that Texas would have free black people fighting for liberty from Mexico, and then as soon as they get it, turn around and say, if you're black in Texas, you need to get out of here, or we're going to sell you into slavery. Like, this is absolutely wild history. And I think that we have to look at our ancestors um, in light in light of this historical context of um, how are you going to talk to your kids about their ancestry if you're concerned for them, especially if you're part of a mixed race group like the Redbones, because they're saying colored. What does that mean? Who counts? And we've talked about this so much on my channel, but for my family in particular, my immediate family, like my mom's grandmother's family, the census records reflected mulatto, black, white, Hispanic, like all kinds of stuff for the same individuals. And you can see just how much that mattered, how much that perception mattered at a time where you could be faced with the decision to leave your home, your homestead, everything you've worked for, and with the threat of slavery. And it's like, where do you go if you're in Texas? My kids, I homeschool my kids, and I have three of them under 10. And right now we are talking about the Underground Railroad. That's what we've been reading books about it. We've been working on projects about it. And we were kind of studying the routes that Harriet Tubman would use, um, on the Underground Railroad. And when we were looking at Texas, we could see that you're far from everywhere else. A lot of the other routes would take you up north, up to Canada and things like that. And in Texas, your option was to go to Mexico. And I think that is something that might be worth exploring is how many, because remember, under the Mexican government, these free black people, they were left alone. They were able to thrive. People immigrated there. I actually saw paperwork from my Goins family that they were in Texas during this time. My family has really deep roots to Texas. Actually, my ancestry DNA community showed San Antonio like as an ancestry community. Like that's how long my family's been there. And they actually went to Coahuila y Tejas. So they left the United States for a while. And they did that in the 1830s, and they became citizens of Spain. And then they end up coming back. And I haven't really pieced together that whole story yet. But this makes a lot of sense. This makes so much sense. I bet some people didn't hang around to see if there was going to be an Ashworth Act that was going to save them. Like you hear that and you say, okay, like we're out of here. Like let's pack our bags and go. Let's go to Mexico. Let's leave. And so, I think that um, if you have a history of family members who would be considered Black during this time, I'm curious if did they migrate to Mexico? Did they flee Texas during this time? Well, now we know why. So I'd love to explore that a little more, but let me know if you knew about the Ashworth Act. And I don't know. I just feel like this history, I'm speechless. I'm still speechless. Even though I have my notes in front of me, I feel speechless over this and frustrated and relieved too to have the information because I think it's going to fill in the blanks for a lot of us who are doing our family story. If you are interested in staying connected, I've been kind of concerned that I might get deplatformed. I'm going to leave a link for you to sign up to join my email list so we can stay connected with each other. And also, I just set up a Twitter account. I'll leave the link to that below too. And hopefully, I can stay on YouTube. But if not, I want to make sure we can stay connected. So be well, and we'll talk soon.